Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Yes? Yes? All right, great. Thank you everyone for coming tonight. We're excited to kick off our 2015-16 season. Alex Gilliam with Public Workshop is our lecturer tonight. I'll tell you a little bit more about him in a second. We just want to thank all of you for coming here, for helping us kick off the season. We're really excited. It should be a great one. And as always, we appreciate our sponsors and our supporters, whether it's the Arkansas Art Center for giving us a nice space to hold all this, helping us do all the pre-function, the generous support of the American Institute of Architects Arkansas chapter, our Central Arkansas chapter. Without them, this is not going to happen. So, big ups to them. Our good friends at Stone's Throw Brewery for giving us free beer. Pretty fantastic. We like them a lot. Hopefully they continue to like us. We try. There's bunches of other people, but you don't want to hear me, you want to hear Alex. The last thing I do want to mention is we are a nonprofit. We don't have permanent funding, so any donations, any support, any suggestions you want to give us, there are boxes and donation forms out front, on the tables. Please stop, give us a moment, give us your thoughts, your recommendations, potentially a speaker you want to hear. And also, if you enjoy your lectures and you want to continue us having lectures, please consider giving us a donation. I promise it'll go to good use. Alright, and nobody cares about this. Architects, you've been here 100 times. Sign in for your education credits. And please go to Facebook, like us, share it. We like more people here. We'll have more lectures. There'll be better lectures. Maybe not better than Alex, but better than me. Maybe you'll get an MC. I don't know. All right. So to tell you a bit about your speaker, Alex Gilliam is the founder of the Public Workshop. He's been called a cheerleader of possibility. It is not hyperbole to say he is a preeminent design expert for teaching K-12 students about design thinking, about getting engaged in your community, and about finding another level of learning. How can you learn by doing? How can you learn on the street as opposed to a pen and a paper, as opposed to multiplication tables? How can we teach people by doing? He's been a National Building Fellow. He's talked all over the country. He's led many symposiums. Amazing person. You don't want to hear me. So if you please welcome Alex Gilliam.
Good evening, everyone. I actually realized this afternoon that this is a strange sort of cyclical moment. The last time I was actually in Little Rock, it was about 11 years ago, and on my way to spending a year in rural Alabama. And this year has been very much a pinch me sort of year in the work that we're doing, and somehow this kind of completes that loop, because that year in Alabama and some of the work and ideas that I was able to prove efficacious there, I don't know, just it all seems connected on both ends. So I'm super happy to be here today. So last summer, Saturday morning, about August 20th or so, 7:30 in the morning, my phone rings. I don't know about you guys, but although I am a morning person, I do not want a phone ringing at 7:30 in the morning. This proved to be one of the few exceptions. So, phone rings. On the other end is this guy, Will. And Will is a young man in Camden, 23 years old, who had gotten involved in this pop-up playground and skate park that we were working on. So at first, I was like, I'm not really sure I want this call, both from the time of day, but also from the fact he's like, when are you coming over? And I, sort of jolted into being awake. It turns out that last night, or the previous night, it had rained a lot, and there had been some damage on the skate ramp. And he was calling because he was very upset about the condition. He didn't have access to the tools on that particular day, and he wanted it fixed. So of course I had really no option but to say, well, I'll be over as soon as I possibly can. And let me be clear, like up to that point I hadn't known Will for very long. He got involved in the project about halfway through, and although it was clear he had a lot to say about things, what was indicated on that morning by that phone call, the fact that this young man was beginning to become this incredible leader, had not yet been seen. So we go over there and we check out the ramp, and you can see some of actually the damage right here. But this is this pop-up playground and sort of gathering space and skate park right in the shadow of the Ben Franklin Bridge. And what I think some would consider one of the more notorious cities in this country at the moment. Whether that's fair or not is another question. So I get over there and find out that Will's sort of leadership, his desire to make sure this thing that he had helped create was in good shape, was really just the beginning of the iceberg. It was just the tip of the iceberg. So we start talking, and it turns out that not only was Will actually staying until often 1 at night, skateboarding there, making sure the spot was clean every day, but he actually started interviewing, doing informal design research of every single person who was coming to the site, asking them why they were coming, what did they like about it, what could be better. And he was recording this on Instagram, kind of sharing it all around the world, so to speak. And then he took us for a walk. Will lives about 4 blocks away in this public housing tower that's nicknamed Iraq, sort of for its reputation towards violence and dysfunction. And at the base of this apartment tower is this old filled-in swimming pool. It's where all the grass is. And he took us over there. He took us over there to show us that actually here was this great space where we could do more skateboarding stuff. Not just for its big deck that surrounded the pool, but actually for the fact that his building has all of these families that come on the weekends. Because there are people in these buildings. There are people there. And those people have children. And those children have children too. And when they come and visit this housing facility, there's nowhere for them to play. But here's this big wide deck. And it also happens that there's a senior association which has taken over the infilled pool and has started gardening there. And Will just sort of posited, wouldn't it be great if the seniors and the kids had a place to share together? So could we design and build not only skatable improvements to this deck, which would make it a joyful, useful space for extended families in the community, but also a place where teenagers and the seniors in the building could come together and learn from one another and become better as a result. So this project was really kind of incredible in what it revealed, and what it revealed about a place and the people who live there. It should be noted that Will actually lives right there. And he became quite prideful of the fact that actually he could see this space from that balcony. And it wasn't only him who could see this space. So the Ben Franklin Bridge is one of the main arteries into Philadelphia from New Jersey. And there are subways that go across it. There are people that have slowly, as Camden slowly builds, there are people who run back and forth across the bridge. There's their big hill running up over the bridge. That summer, there were engineers who were working on improving the tracks on the bridge. And pictures just started popping up on the internet in weird places where we hadn't sort of expected. subway drivers who, in the midst of driving their train, had turned and taken a picture and then pushed this out. This thing was happening here. And then people showing up at the site because of these pictures. Engineers coming by and saying, how can we help? And it got lots and lots of press. The press was cool, but we would also get these messages passed down from store owners down the street, who were too far away for us to really deeply connect with, but like messages such as, come by our pizza shop anytime, we'd be really happy to help. But mostly what this project revealed was the incredible human potential and sense of care and ownership that existed in this neighborhood that goes completely contrary to what you read about in the newspaper, whether local or national, what you even hear about on the ground sometimes. And so, here the guys and girls are skating, and again, they would skate till 1 or 2 at night. Now, if we had a community meeting about, would you actually want a skate park there? You can be pretty damn sure that the people who live in this building right here and the people who live in the buildings right here are not going to be super, super excited about a skate park initially. And like many of the situations that we live in today, or many of the really sticky, difficult, wicked problem issues, it's really hard or impossible to have a conversation about that. Whoa. Wrong button. But in this case, these guys skated here till 1 or 2 at night, and Will, in his design researcher advocacy, had actually started going around with his friends and interviewing neighbors to see how they felt about this whole thing that was happening. And quite frankly, they were incredibly excited by it, because it had actually driven off many of the negative uses that were happening on that vacant lot, such as drug use, people using the bathroom. The cops were actually excited as well, because there was sort of downward slope of incidents that they were having to deal with around there. So, although that conversation never could have happened in a community meeting setting, what was ultimately happening was that the people in the neighborhood were much happier. They'd much rather have people who cared, who were cleaning up, who were doing something active and staying out of trouble than the other things that potentially happened there when the lot was vacant. Another aspect of human potential that this project revealed was that, if you know much about skateboarding, one, skateboarders are well known for taking over and maintaining and defending to a certain extent places that you and I might not love or care about and making them their own. Sometimes that can go in kind of a negative direction, where they don't share that well. But in this case, this project revealed this incredible sort of empathy with local community members, especially younger ones, and the fact that this skate park could double as a play structure. And so on many occasions I'd be out there and watch this incredible dance, almost choreographed dance, that occurred between the skateboarders and little kids. Because of course you want to slide down that thing. Mm-hmm. Why wouldn't you, right? Mm-hmm. And so the way they worked it out was the kids would take a turn sliding, and then the skateboarders would go. And then the kids would take a turn sliding, and then the skateboarders would go. So you know what? Skateboarders and kids can get along. Another meeting that would have never ended positively would have been around street closures, temporary street closures for skateboarding. So at a certain point in this project, the lot started to fill up with stuff. We ran out of space. So we started having these DIY play and skateboard building sessions, and inevitably, because there was little space, everything started to spill out into the street. And some things were blatantly skate-like, but others were a little more ambiguous. They were there for climbing. And one might think that neighbors would actually, and community members would start to get pissed off that, man, I'm having to weave through this nonsense in the road. Quite the contrary, actually. They loved it, they honked, they were like, this is great, and they drove around the block and they made do. So it showed this incredible potential for action to start happening in the streets, where streets could become more of these places of play and exercise rather than places of danger. And then one evening, Joseph's father, Brian, came up to me. And Brian, Camden, North Camden is a really odd and kind of lovely place. There are people who are really struggling. There are people who have been there forever, who have been fighting the long, hard fight to make sure their neighborhood doesn't disintegrate more. And then there are people who have moved there because they care deeply about Camden. And their wealth profile doesn't necessarily fit the majority of the population there. So Brian is one of these people, and he and his son moved back to Camden because they care. Well, Brian comes up to me one evening and he pulls me aside. And he's like, how can we design things for the neighborhood that would actually get my son to stop being a sloth? To pull him away from the smartphone, which might as well be surgically attached to his hand. Now, Joseph is actually, he's an incredibly smart kid, just the nerdiest of nerdy. And I should also say, as you'll find out in a moment, that I'm deeply passionate about sort of how do we turn neighborhoods and communities into these extended places of play and exercise. And so we sat down, and Brian's incredibly passionate. He's like, could we use apps to gamify this? And very intense conversation, and out of the corner of my eye, Joseph shows up with his bike. And that morning, Joseph had helped build these hills. And one of the cheapest, simplest ways you can improve a space for kids is actually just to dump a bunch of dirt there and to make some hills. And so he had helped make these hills, and out of the corner of my eye, on this really, really scary tiny bike, this is way foreshortened. This thing is like, you expect to see bears, that image of bears riding on bicycles. So he starts riding this bike over the hills as Brian and I are having this conversation about what can we do to solve this problem. Joseph starts going over one hill, then he went over a slightly larger one, and then a larger one, and then a larger one, until every time he's going over progressively larger ones, he starts exclaiming, "I am king of the mountain." Until he finally goes over this large one, which I'm really not quite sure how he did, quite frankly, because I actually race bicycles and fairly fearless in this department. I'm scared crapless riding that bicycle. But here's Joseph taking risks and exercising and finding deep pride in that. He had already solved the problem that his father and I were talking about. And that evening, as I understood later, Joseph actually fell asleep at the dinner table because he had been so active that day, because he had helped build this public space. He could not stop riding over the hills again and again. So this project revealed this tremendous potential within youth to actually do things like exercise that most didn't think was possible. And it wasn't just about exercise, it was actually, the project revealed these incredible sort of latent potential in people, where there were these deep desires that's common, quite frankly, in many communities. To take ownership, to fix the things around them, to do more. And it wasn't just actually kids, it was adults too. In fact, it was kind of staggering to meet Jose, and of course to hear him eloquently talk about how he wanted to see more of this stuff, but to actually find out that there was this great history in the neighborhood of this stuff. In fact, Jose, 15 years ago, maybe 20, let's say 20. 20 years ago, had actually built a half pipe for BMX bikes right around the corner, directly in front of a hardware store. Think about this. We get all excited about temporary urbanism and making connections between resources, and we think all this stuff is new, and Jose was doing this 20 years ago, except that Jose's ramp was so challenging that when people would crash on it, they actually would take chalk and outline people's profiles as if it was a murder scene. So in this case, this project was revealing these stories and passions that never came up in any of the sort of community design and organizing meetings that were led by a very well-known participatory design firm in this country. These things never came up. None of these people ever came to those meetings, in fact. And then there was Bubby and Turtle. So this project was a little odd, quite frankly, in how it went down, because every single one of our projects is with a client. It's with an on-the-ground community organization, most often doing some sort of social service work in a community. Sometimes they're a school, sometimes they're a cultural organization, sometimes they're a governmental institution. But usually there's a built-in constituency that we plug into and immediately start building from. In this case, this organization was a little bit more kind of up in the air, didn't have those connections, and so for us to kind of immediately go in and start building was a little awkward and not the way we like doing things. And so there was about a day and a half where, quite rightly, we were getting weird stares and grumbles and stuff like that, until Bubby came up, and that's Bubby on the right. And so Bubby comes up and asks me what we're doing, and I told him, I was like, hey, do you want to build? He's like, I'd love to build, but so would my friend Turtle. Let me go get him. So Bubby and Turtle come and start building. And first off, immediately the conversation in the neighborhood changes. We actually screwed up at one point. We didn't immediately give them safety glasses because we were so excited. They were like, you can't build, right? And this gentleman comes up about 20 minutes later, kind of grumbly and slightly pissed off. He's saying they should really be wearing safety glasses. And we could have gotten pissed off about that, but actually it's one of these wonderful early failures I think is very important in work, where you could look at it as this guy being sort of angry and whatnot, but actually it showed he cared. He stopped, he got involved, and he actually stayed. And he wouldn't have done that if Bubby and Turtle weren't there. But we pack up for the evening, we get halfway home, we realize that we left something in the shipping container where all of our tools were being stored. So we went back, and there are Bubby and Turtle waiting for us. And we get out of the car, excuse me, and Bubby and Turtle pretty much in unison say, you screwed up. I'm like, okay. We screw up, guys. Well, as it turns out, some of the new team members had totally missed hitting studs throughout. And it wasn't just like some blatantly obvious ones on the plywood when they were starting to put down the first layer of sheathing, but they proceeded to climb under the structure and show us all throughout every single missed stud. Wow, right? So they clearly, you know, this I don't need to explain to you how much that is. Anyway, what was really cool, aside from their latent building knowledge and the fact that they deeply cared, and they were just in the span of a few hours starting to deeply take ownership over the space, that was cool. But then they show up the next day with friends to come help fix it. And then because of the massive visibility of this project, because it was this green thing next to this bridge in this infamous, notorious neighborhood, of which nothing positive is supposed to be happening, people started stopping by, including a prom here on the right. He started to work with us to have pop-up bike shop things there. And then Joseph Kelly on the right, he actually was not from Camden at all. He was actually from the township over. It looks, all the townships that surround Camden, the typical attitude recently has been, well, we might as well build sort of a fortress around Camden, right? We're going to turn our backs on it. But in Joseph riding by on his motorcycle one day and seeing everything that was happening, he was starting, this was starting to flip that dialogue for him, where he was starting to see that, that maybe Haddonfield and Cherry Hill and these other places, that our future livelihood is deeply connected to this space, and that maybe we should start investing there. And that if people like Will really deeply care, that maybe there is something to build off of there. And so we would have these very strange, like, drive-bys. And I don't mean guns, drive-bys where people would either yell out the window, "How can we help?" Or I'd get emails like a couple days later saying, "What can we donate to support this?" And these were people who were not even living in Camden, but had some connection to the area in one way or another. And then, of course, there was Will and Tiffany and the rest of the team who helped build it, who it was clear wanted to do much more than this. In fact, they made an incredible trek on a routine basis in between phases of this project, all the way over to Philadelphia on their skateboards or walking. And in the winter, this actually, there was one day where it was snowing. They came over so that they could keep on honing their skills and contributing. But getting back to Will and getting back to sort of human potential, one of the things that was really staggering about this project, which I hadn't really come across until months later when I was interviewing Will for this presentation that I had to give about the project. So it was startling to find out that Will had gone back to his building, to Northgate Towers, and in the ensuing months had become even more of an activist. So, we've had a couple really bad winters in the Philadelphia region, and so when the weather started getting bad in November, he spent a month trying to meet with the building manager. Now, I don't know about you guys, but I don't always have the tenacity to pester someone for a month to try to get a meeting with them. But he did. And eventually he got to sit down with her, and he spent 2 hours sitting down with her, negotiating the use of the basement space in this building so his friends could skateboard when the weather was good. This is not, all that outside of the norm of how I had come to understand Will at that point. But his reflection upon why he had the confidence to do that was really special. And so this space, this pop-up playground and skate park, and having all of these different people, many of whom were not like him, come and be excited about Camden and be excited about doing it, be excited about skateboarding, gave him the confidence that he was not alone in his ideas, that these had value, and that gave him the confidence to go and relentlessly pester the building manager to gain access to the space. And then jump forward 2 months, and on this really, 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 really cold evening in January, totally dark outside, kind of miserable, not want to get out of your house sort of thing. At the first community meeting for the next round of projects, I walk into the space, and there are cops there, and most of the people there are your sort of 40-something professional community meeting goers. And I walk in, and Will almost jumps out of his seat. I can remember it to this day. Almost jumps out of his seat, waving at me like this. There's Will and Tiffany in the midst of, again, these professional community meeting goers, starting to advocate for their neighborhood. And actually asserting for themselves that this is really important, despite some of the professional meeting goers saying, this was taking advantage of kids. And they're like, taking advantage of kids? What are you talking about? This was incredibly important and empowering to us. This was really, really special, and we just want more of this. And I can't emphasize how unique it is that they went to that meeting. In fact, if we were to take this group, and maybe you guys probably are a little more engaged than the average person, but still, it's something startling, like only 3 of you will have gone to a community meeting this year, with a group this size. So just statistically, the fact that they're at that meeting is huge. Throw in the fact that they're teenagers of color in an incredibly poor neighborhood, and they're there advocating for themselves, and that's something truly incredible. And they had transitioned from something that was really fast to now this sort of slow, painful thing that very few of us enjoy, quite frankly, right? Except for the really good cookies that were at this meeting. So, although I'm getting almost embarrassing texts like this from Tiffany, it was very clear that this project had really started to grow these incredible leaders, or actually not grow, I can't take credit for that, but actually reveal and then support and bolster. And so this work is very similar to much of what I get to do every day. Sometimes the projects are about, not necessarily about a neighborhood. Sometimes the projects like this one in Philadelphia are about actually revealing the latent potential in terms of teachers and students who typically don't come to the table and are not part of the process of creating the school. Sometimes these projects are about really revealing new potentials for curriculum and how the school should be shaped. So in this particular project is an afternoon when everyone else was flooded out of the school, or flooding out of the school, but this particular day people stayed. Why did they stay? Well, because we had showed up, the 9th grade girls that we were working with had showed up with the pieces to start to assemble these rolling hangout pods. Sort of a simple improvement that they wanted to make to the school to inspire others to make improvements to the school. And they started assembling them on this afternoon. And of course, the boys show up, right?
Yeah, of course.
And in very short order, people are flooding in instead of going out, mostly guys again. But I might as well have had a lawn chair and a cocktail and be sitting off in the corner, because the girls were totally manhandling the guys and teaching them how to use orbital sanders and biscuit joiners and the like, and just manhandling the heck out of them. And it was a delight to see. And it wasn't just that the students were coming up and getting involved, but pretty soon the teachers started rolling in. And they started asking questions like, how could we have made this a central part of our curriculum at school instead of a side after school or kind of pull-out program? How could my math class have helped make these incredibly or surprisingly complex to fabricate geometric forms? And then the principal rolls in and he's like, well, how can I help? And we ended up getting a follow-up grant to this project that of about $100,000 to create a makerspace at the very center of the school. The conversation quickly moved from purely about academics to how can we make this the center of our school, ultimately moving the central office, the biggest space in the school, to this small, tiny room so that the makerspace could be the first thing that you see when you enter the school. So it would actually be the very center of the school and its curriculum, and of ultimately putting the students at the forefront of fixing this beautiful but decrepit building, where each of those needs, the crumbling shelves, peeling paint, became an opportunity for rich learning and education. And in fact, revealed this huge potential that, of course, the first conversations, once we got the makerspace, we started creating the makerspace, were around risk and danger, and how are we going to create this space, how are we going to keep this space locked, to actually having teachers teach students and students teach teachers. In Flint, Michigan, it was about bringing together kind of people who had never come together, and totally challenging attitudes towards risk and danger. Sometimes the projects are actually about creating culture and identifying who those people are. So around a makerspace, another makerspace that we helped create in Philadelphia. It's sort of a temporary series of improvements in the larger evolution of the creation of a space. Building in the work was actually really dedicated to figuring out who would like to be a part of this space, who would be the key leaders, and then what could this space be. In Arizona, the work really focused around, although it was around building, it really was about trying to connect the school with its larger community, and by community I mean parents. This school is almost 100% low-income Hispanic, and they have a hell of a time getting parents in for any number of reasons that you and I would understand, ranging from language barriers to immigration questions to time, right? But building, as it turns out, actually happened to be this common sort of vein that pulsed through everyone. You know, when I ask students how many of your family members, extended or otherwise, have used power tools or are builders, almost all of them raised their hands. And so all of a sudden, building and making improvements to the school became this vehicle for people coming in. And you didn't have to be able to have a verbal conversation about what could be or what not could be, or we just built. And then in some of the most current work that we're doing, in this case, play and building is really focused around, on one hand, revealing what new attitudes towards risk should be, and how we can actually step back from the abyss of worrying about splinters and pretty much bland streetscape design and putting children in almost what I don't take this the wrong way, but almost like concentration camp, fenced in playgrounds, and play should only happen here, stay in there, and no one else should come in. Instead of actually realizing that play and kids are a vital part of public space and social lives in general. So this project, Designing and Building in Public, is really about helping the health department in Philadelphia and the streets department kind of understand what their new policy should be, as well as using play to start to influence and support positive behaviors that are actually already going on in this corner, but really have more positive behaviors happening on this corner in Philadelphia that is really, really struggling, where there's heavy drug activity and violence and stuff like that. And what that's revealing is an incredible desire, like Joseph, for people to actually have ready access to exercise. This crazy seesaw sit-up bench that we quickly prototyped. And this is a pastor who was just moments before doing sit-ups on it himself, straight-legged sit-ups at that, which are really hard.
Is he blessing it? No.
He is blessing it. He is blessing the sit-up seesaw and a failed experiment. His blessing did not save the sit-up seesaw, because we were trying to actually see whether you could do it simultaneously and whether that would be some sort of crazy, unspoken thing in terms of balance and communication. It didn't work at all. And in this case, like this mini park and this playground that we're creating there, 2.5 weeks ago, if you arrived at that spot in the morning, there would be poop in that corner. And ever since, we've been really clear about the fact that this is a place for play. This is a place for kids. All of that stopped. And so this process in this case of actually making evident the exploration of risk, of exploring what a bench might be like that's designed for play, that could be on the sidewalk, making really evident that conversation or that exploration has been essential in moving beyond the conversation that I also had 2 weeks ago with the health department, which was like, well, what about splinters? What if a kid falls? And the routine one I get from streets department is, what if a kid falls off of this into traffic? Well, it's like, well, what if a kid or anyone falls off a bench or trips, There are reasonable standards for risk, but what are those unreasonable standards and how do we move beyond that? And that's how that's evolved. So I think it's really clear that it's really important to make clear that in each of these cases, none of these would have really happened the way they did if we hadn't started with building. And Will would not have gotten involved in this project and made it so much better in Camden had we not started with building. Because what he saw when he got involved halfway through this project, he saw us building. And that communicated so many things implicitly to him. It communicated that he could trust us. It communicated that we were doing something that was worth taking a risk. And that really sort of showed him you should get involved. So I do want to talk about and break down why it's important to actually start with building. And some tactics that you might be able to use in Arkansas and Little Rock. So, number one, start with building. How many of y'all do this? Nobody? Liars. Couple. Why do you do that?
Frustration.
I'm sorry?
Frustration.
Frustration, sure. Any other reasons?
To get the lid off of the pen?
No. Okay. Ask me sometime later about super glue and using your teeth to get super glue bottle open. Yeah. My mother freaking out. Any other reasons why you put your pen in your mouth or pencil? Frustration? Utility?
Contemplation.
I'm sorry? Concentrate?
Contemplation.
Contemplation. So this is kind of like, when you do that, what you may not remember is that this is almost like the wings on a chicken. It's a remnant from another era. Because this is actually how you started learning about the world. You put things in your mouth and you bit them, right? So when you were biting the pen, or when you were biting a pencil or biting anything, your mom's finger, it was your way of understanding what the material and structural qualities of that thing was. So implicitly, you're understanding the qualities of a plastic cylinder, right? And this moment here, which I'm sure all of us did to our parents at one point or another, right? Many of those things that our parents, or maybe you as parents now find, or grandparents find most annoying. Sure, there are times where they're trying to get your attention, and they are really trying to needle you a little bit. But this is learning. So this kid banging on those pots and pans, they are learning about the properties of a cylinder, of metal. They're learning about acoustics. Control, right? Fine motor skills, gross motor skills. And then there's that. I'm not really sure whether I was imagining that box was a tank or an airplane, and it probably switched within about 15 minutes, quite frankly. But this is how we learn. We all started learning about the world. By building things, by knocking them down, by building them again, by imagining something like a box as something that is not. This is how we all started learning about the world. It's a common language. And quite frankly, it feels real good too, right? Building things and knocking things down is just, it feels good. And there's a reason for that. And if any of y'all are involved in makerspaces or education, I highly encourage you to try to steer people away from initially spending all their money investing in digital technologies. Because quite frankly, they become a panacea for not dealing with the real issues of risk, which is, in most classrooms in this country, we're not even letting kids have normal scissors. And that's a fundamental problem. So you know what? We're not going to let kids have scissors, but we're going to drop $500,000 on technology, MakerBots and laser cutters and stuff like that. And there is a deeper problem there, aside from the crazy attitudes towards risk. There is a deeper idea there that we're all missing out on. And that is simply that when you're being kinesthetic, when you're building things and knocking things down, it's activating the dopamine system. And the chemicals that are being released in your body when you're doing these things are the fundamental building blocks for feeling good, for connecting with one another, for tenacity, for team building. I mean, who wouldn't want to be doing that, right? And this is exactly the opposite of that. I mean, this is exactly the opposite of that. In fact, building reminds us of these behaviors that we've forgotten. That it's important to fail. And in most of our projects, we try to fail very publicly in the first 15 minutes. It's important to take risks that push you to your kind of the edge of your comfort zone, right? And that looks kind of dangerous, but it actually is not. And it feels real good. And to be clear, like our design process, as I showed you with the switchback bench that we're doing in the health department right now, all of our design, like something like the rolling hangout pods, they don't just magically appear. They're not magically birthed. This is this incredibly iterative process. I mean, a hangout pod is really the same thing as a fort, right? And we all built pillow forts, sofa forts. And we built them over and over again. And so really all we're doing in our design process of designing and building from the word go in the first 15 minutes of a project at full scale, where usually we ban drawing. Instead, we're drawing with wood. This not only feels good, but again, it is tapping in to this basic language that we all understand and that we can all participate in. And one of the most empowering things about it is not the problem solving, as many of us are led to believe, but actually the simple notion that much of the world around us, despite the incredible complexity that we live in right now, actually is still knowable. That we don't have to have a conversation about, the forces on these chairs and whether that's going to be safe or not. We can actually test it and lean on it and jump on it, and each of you can do that. You don't need me to tell you that. So this process really encourages just simply getting back in touch with this. With the notion that if we test things enough, whether it's jumping up and down on them, sitting them, telling a story about how it's going to be used, there's this incredible latent potential that we can tap into in terms of everyone being able to participate. And what often gets revealed in the process are things that we would have never thought would otherwise be possible. Like, I love this kid to death, but, for his age, he was a pretty chunky kid. And I would have never thought that a swing or that a garden hose would actually, number one, be a swing, or number two, support him. But through his fearlessness and his testing in this playground that he helped design build in Philadelphia, all of a sudden I now think of a garden hose as a swing. And that actually is incredibly durable. And it's not even screwed in. These are all friction. These are all effectively friction connections. So by starting with building, we're revealing, we're making people feel good. It's totally countering the narrative, the common narrative in education and community meetings. We're revealing possibilities that we haven't thought of, that others haven't thought of necessarily either. But it's also outwardly communicating that we're interested in action and that we're interested in solutions and we're interested in doing things. So tactic number 2, none of the starting with building would really work or work as well as it could if we didn't do it on the sidewalk. If we didn't do everything that's part and parcel of one of these projects in public. That we're moving design the classroom, the community meeting, to the actual site. We're doing everything there. So in the case of this middle school in Virginia, where we had a project this spring, the biggest issue, the biggest question was really, or the two questions were risk. Like, what are the limits of tolerance towards risk in this community? And it gets a little muddy because it's a rural community and it's actually a sort of a rapidly expanding community. So you'll have the farm kids who are very comfortable, and their parents are very comfortable with them scraping their knees, and then you have upper middle class families who are starting to move out of the city because of higher costs, who have radically different ideas about how their children should exist on a daily basis. At the same time, this school, the main point of this project was actually that you have such a diverse group of kids coming together for the first time in this middle school. Hispanic, African American, low income, high income, and they're all coming and seeing each other for the first time, and they're coming with their parents' baggage. And so in this case, this building project, by doing everything in public, was really the main intent was to start to reseed those relationships and actually build community. And in all of our projects, actually, it's usually the A and the D students, the A, the D, and the F students who rise to the top and do more. And think about, for those of you who are designers, how many times have you worked, if you've worked with schools at all, and you've asked for teachers and students to be a part of it, you're going to get the best kids and teachers in the school. That's not who we should be designing school for, quite frankly. So, in this case, the project was about revealing the potential of students who were untapped in the school and putting all of those issues on stage. So we did rolling tree houses. It's the riskiest possible thing you could do. And the cafeteria is the only place that everyone in the school goes to. So we're not hiding anything. And the real tipping point in this project was like day 4, when one of the teachers climbed up in one of the prototype towers. And the lunchroom just fell silent. And then it was almost like, I mean, it wasn't a cheer, but it might as well have been, you know? And she's a very heavy-set woman, so this was even more ballsy on her part. I mean, really. But yeah, in this case, that designing and building in public actually revealed that the worst kids in the school could become these incredible leaders. And also that in terms of capacity, they had this hidden capacity within their assistant principal who's an incredible builder. And now he is helping lead all these incredible programs in the school. And the question is, how do we give him more space so that he can do this stuff? I mean, he's dealing with student management and discipline already. Now he has a much different relationship with those students in the process. In the case of this community message board in Philadelphia, yeah, I mean, normally what happens in these projects is we're designing and building in public, and people are stopping their cars in rush hour traffic and honking their horns and asking what's going on and thumbs up. People are stopping and getting involved because building is a conversation, right? It's like the weather. It gives you something to talk about. And especially with the sort of rapid prototyping, where the design is constantly evolving, it outwardly communicates to people that they can contribute, that they can come up and get involved. And you know, in the case of a lot of our projects, public space really is the original internet. And you know, of course, it's great that we have Twitter and Facebook and Instagram. And it certainly means it's a little bit more flat and easy to communicate with some people, but it is a nightmare, community organizing right now, in terms of being able to hit all of your audience with one singular method, right? Or even 2, or even 3. But by designing and building in public, it's all there. Anyone can come up and participate. Anyone can come up and join. And so building and acting like a conversation, people come up and they see you building, they're much more willing to open up because they trust you like Will, and they start to give ideas. And they start to talk deeply about a neighborhood that gets beyond the normal community meeting situation where you are largely primed by what happened before you came into the meeting. not the conversation that's happening at that meeting itself. And so sure, you find out different needs and opportunities. We have gotten really into quantifying that data, much more so even than this, for transit authorities, for the Philadelphia Water Department, where building is actually this mechanism. Building is really a means to the end, which is much better community engagement, better story and data gathering that actually positively affects policy. In this case, all the buildings, or many of the buildings in Philadelphia, when they demo them, they knock them into the basement. And so the act of digging actually starts to reveal this incredible history of the neighborhood, where you're bumping into toilets and details and all of what used to be there, where in this case, it started to lead to this really rich conversation with community members who are like, oh yeah, I remember that when that was up in the building, and you have this conversation about the history of the place. But what was really impressive about this particular project that we're working very hard to build on now is that small business owners started to come up and A, try to hire away our team, and then B, they actually started to solicit for small improvements for their own businesses. And they weren't asking for them for free, but in the case of Leroy the barber, he wanted a sign for his barbershop. There was a pizza store owner who wanted tables. There was a daycare center that wanted a small knee wall. And so all of a sudden we started to realize that there was real local demand for design, and that we actually could start to connect all the people who are coming up and wanting to learn how to build with these needs in that neighborhood, and to start to really develop a real sort of local economy, and a much stronger local economy around building and design and small improvements and business. But the other benefit of moving everything to the sidewalk is that action is contagious. So if I yawn, what are you going to do? Right. We are deeply hardwired to copy one another, mirroring neurons. And so, when someone like Anderson is picking up the drill and taking action, when there's a little bit of levity and absurdity happening, intentional or not, people can't help but come up and get involved. And it's made even more powerful when it's what I would call an underdog is the one taking action. So what I haven't broken down is that, yes, it's the A and the D and the F students who are typically, when we're working with schools or teens, who rise to the top. Typically the A students are girls, and the D and the F are guys. But some of our most powerful tools, so to speak, for stimulating really rich community engagement are actually teenage women in power tools, because no one expects them to be designing and building amazing things. But you get, as happened in the school in Philadelphia, you get the girls start building, the guys show up, and incredible things start to flow from there. At the same time, for teens and participants, when you're sitting there working and designing and building in public and you're taking risks, and it's very clear, a lot of times people don't understand exactly what we're designing and building, but they understand the scene. They get it. They see the risk being taken. They see the action happening. And so that act of someone honking their horn and giving the team a thumbs up in rush hour traffic, of coming up and saying, nice job, at least in the case of teens, they're able to realize their self-efficacy in a time frame that would otherwise take years in a school setting. And so what happens is all of a sudden they become supercharged and they're working harder, and then because of mirroring neurons, adults feel compelled to work hard, to get involved or work harder, and it just snowballed on itself. And so yeah, in one project in Chicago, it was incredible what 11 teenage women going out and designing and building improvements to this vacant lot, what it did in terms of the community and how it resulted in this massive sort of community rising to make this lot a wonderful place, where everyone from the vilified cops to the gangs participated, in this case because it was teenage women. And that if it was teenage guys, it would have thrown the whole thing off, because people would have, they would have felt like they had to pump their chests and stuff. But in this case, Mariah and the other women who were part of the team were the highest means to stimulate that level of community. This is actually not that abstract of an idea. It's not a new idea. Not really in the least bit that original. Daniel Burnham, when he released the Burnham Plan, actually has a component which is a middle school curriculum. And he wasn't necessarily doing it out of the kindness of his heart. But he actually knew that if he actually started engaging the middle school students, I mean, there's no one more badgering and kind of obnoxious, quite frankly, than a middle school student. And you know that the parents are going to hear about it if you get some middle schoolers excited about it. And so he actually was creating this middle school curriculum to get more citywide buy-in and knowledge of what he was trying to do with master planning the city. And, to be clear, unfortunately at the moment, engagement is not unfortunately, it's not unfortunate it's a hot topic, but it's a blindly applied hot topic. And community engagement is, as it's pushed now, it's blindly pushed, is very much like inviting someone you don't like to your birthday. And what I mean by that is that while it is really important to engage as many people as possible in a deep and meaningful way in a project, for those of you who are designers, it's also really important to be clear about what you need and what you want. And it is possible to get amazing things through working with youth and community members, but they don't want to be pandered to any more than you don't want them there at the wrong times. So it's actually really, really important to be clear about what you need and starting with need. So in this project in Chicago, where I helped a design firm rethink how they're engaging community, it became clear they needed more data from this particular neighborhood that they were working in about needs, about how the buildings that they were creating, the green affordable housing, was actually working, so that they could push policy and that they could actually make their buildings better. So instead of actually taking on their traditional role, they were very community oriented, and that was great. In their traditional mindset, they would have hired Brenda, who's in the top. They would have had her intern with them over the summer and just had her making models in the corner. But as it became very clear, that was actually a stressful relationship for them, and ultimately a stressful relationship with Brenda. Because they knew that no matter how hard they tried, just because of skill level, it takes time, right, to be a really good model maker, that it was a one-way sort of, they felt like it was a one-way street. They were doing it out of the goodness of the heart. The models that she was making were never quite going to be the type that they needed for a client presentation. At the same time, Brenda felt that too. But instead, if we actually step back and look at what Brenda's really able to bring to the table, the fact that she actually has a lisp and slightly flawed diction, and she has an incredible gift for gab, which makes her remarkably disarming. So you send her out in a neighborhood and she will talk to anyone and get anyone talking. She also happens to be one of the most precocious photographers that I know, and is shooting for ESPN now and other organizations like that. So what if actually the firm looked at Brenda for her real skills and what she could bring to the table? Now she is actually at the table with the principals of the firm as an equal, where she is actually bringing something to the table that they don't have, especially since she's Hispanic and she's able to speak the language and connect in a way that they're not. And this whole team actually was kind of built out in that way. What do we need? Who's going to best fill that? And sometimes as designers, and you're at this presentation, many of you are probably do-gooders, like I am. We get a little blinded by the do-gooderisms, right? And we sort of fail to realize that actually, by starting with need, we can actually accomplish many more of the things that we want in a much more efficient and effective way. So yeah, in this case, they gathered, ultimately, they made high-tech Arduino sensors for measuring air quality, temperature, finding heat islands in the neighborhood, documenting whether some of the landscaping features were working or not, gathering the stories behind new and future users. And, you know, it's helpful to understand that this little forlorn-looking triangle is not a very dead garden. It's actually a high-tech, very expensive piece of urban infrastructure. This is a rain garden, has other actually hidden features in it. But when we think about one of the biggest challenges of sustainability is, you know, most of the benefits are invisible. Most people don't know what a bioswale is. Most of the things that an average citizen would see in terms of improving their daily lives by investing so much money in this stuff, it's deferred, it's down the road. So you actually need people to help be advocates for that. So in this case, we designed a citizen science program where we had 63-year-olds to 15-year-olds who were passionate sort of advocates for these spaces in New York City, but also were measuring them for the Department of Environmental Protection and seeing whether they were actually working. So sometimes those needs are really just right around us. I mean, what if we actually saw that broken locker as an opportunity rather than a problem? Or the fact that most bus stops in this city and many others lack seating. So in our work now, in fact, to bring this full circle to my trip through here 11 years ago, and this project in rural Alabama that I did, that project in rural Alabama put me in this mindset of nothing, moving forward, nothing that I do, or excuse me, everything that I do is going to be about finding those needs in cities where youth and community can legitimately have a positive impact. Nothing was going to be a simulation anymore. And so since then, I am constantly looking for needs. And a lot of those aren't very big. Like, one of the problems that we have, even within our own practice, and this is sort of internalizing it into our own practice, is that halfway through a project, all the pencils are gone. So solving that is actually this rich opportunity for teaching design, for coming up with innovative things. This is another solution. This is it's a sort of a pencil holster that has a speed square built into it, and a pencil sharpener, and the whole goal was, why would anyone want to walk off of this thing? Right? It's not exactly cool. The solution, I actually don't have the newest picture, but the solution we landed on was actually making these laser cut pencil clips so the pencil can stay on you at all times. So you can be a super nerd like me. But everything in our practice, especially even desk organizing, becomes this opportunity for increasing entrepreneurship, for becoming better designers, better fabricators, building teams, etc. You know, whether it's desk organizing, whether it's filing our papers, that may or may not hang from students' plugs, from simply organizing our stuff, to hanging our coats, to having receptacles for a variety of things. So this project is actually called the Building Hero Project, and is one of the most probably exportable things that we do. And I should say that what happens in each one of our, at least community-based projects, and we do a wide range of work, but the community-based projects, most of which I've talked about tonight, we get 1 to 5 people who rise to the top in these projects who really want to do more. And even though we are very explicitly doing this work with an on-the-ground community partner and client, so that we're not cracking these people open and leaving them high and dry, saying, you can change the world, and then like, see ya. Because that doesn't work. At the very least, because it's through a community organization, they have this infrastructure
whether they're young and old, that they can at least tap into. But a lot of times those organizations don't have the real skills or power to be able to supercharge and support those people in their sort of rapid growth into being what I call a building hero. And so insofar as Philadelphia and the Philadelphia region is concerned, we launched the Building Hero project to be able to take those 15 through 65-year-olds and bring them together and support them and grow them and help them develop the skills so that they can be these incredible change agents in their own communities, as well as help us grow our work. And all it is really, it's a product-based community design leadership program where we're taking all of the needs, and that includes the team members, not just public workshop at a firm, but we're taking those needs and we're seeing those things as opportunities to build skills, to connect people and build social cohesion and connections in new ways, to ultimately help people achieve things long term, but also to put money into people's pockets. So each one of these products, it's kind of like shop class on steroids, doubles as something, the product you could simply buy, but it's also a certification. And so once a team member has learned how to make that and can make that object to museum store quality, then they're paid to fabricate that. Built into that are all sorts of skills. Beyond that, you could also buy that object as a class. And that's really cool because for us, the most useful people in expanding this work are ones who can teach others how to make great things. And so when you buy a class to make a desk organizer and a building hero, whether it's a 15-year-old or a 65-year-old is teaching you how to make that, they're becoming a better teacher and a better leader in a fairly safe setting. The work that we do in the street, on sidewalks and streets and communities is really, really hard. Here's an opportunity to hone those skills in a fairly safe setting. And this project really is, was intended to support people like Will, to help them grow, to put money in their pockets, and to help them help us do even more. And what's actually really cool about this is it's become a mechanism that we've only recently realized it's kind of like a contagion. So most of the projects that I've shown you are between 2 and 4 weeks long. And the very intense engagement is not necessarily that cheap, quite frankly. And at the same time, I want to work my way out of a job in a place that I'm working in. But I also want to make sure that we're able to support that group in a way that helps whatever's happening there continue to flourish. So the building heroes are coming out of these various projects, and they're coming with us, and they're developing skills they can't in their own communities. And what we've seen now is that they're actually going back into their organizations and acting is again, a contagion, a virus, where we will end up learning how to fabricate some crazy thing, and we're literally able to go back to that organization like this school and see various design details like this L leg spread throughout the entire school. And in this school, for example, all of their needs are actually becoming opportunities for entrepreneurship and leadership, etc. And they're sort of starting to copy the Building Hero project. But I think the better story is now that when we started off, when we got the first grant to work with them to do this makerspace, again, the conversation was, how are we going to keep this, the doors locked, make sure no one runs off with the tools? Now it's, what days are the students the key student leaders going to meet, who are now the shop monitors who are running everything? What days are they going to meet? How are they going to communicate with one another issues that are arising so that they're effectively managing the shop and making sure it's safe? No teacher involvement here. They're also taking on projects with community partners that they never would have before, and it's the students who are leading those things. But to be clear, these needs are all around us. And I love this story that came out early this spring of a special ed teacher in New York City who got really frustrated with the fact that it was taking forever to get building services to do any sort of design accommodations for his clients. And so he found this sort of resource of junked materials and junked desks in New York City DOE, and just started going and making the repairs himself. And on a larger city scale, I love this project in Richmond, Virginia, where they have actually, in the past 2 years, they decided, you know what? We're going to stop buying our bike racks from Minneapolis. That's ridiculous. We're actually going to reinvest the money in our CTE programs and have them start making bike racks. And start driving money back into the program, starting driving entrepreneurship, etc. So even though, quite frankly, that bike rack kind of sucks, it is a thought in the right direction. So, in much of what I've talked about tonight, a lot of it is not easy. It's very joyful, but it is not easy. It's very tough to pull off. And in many ways, I've suggested both, seemingly contradictory approaches of leading and taking risks, or at the same time stepping back and getting out of the way, of being what I call sort of strong and wrong. At the core, it's really tough. You have to learn how to sort of break dance. You're having to, in doing this work, you're having to know how to be at the center of the circle. You're having to know when to be sort of a part of the circle, dancing along with everyone else. And you have to know when to be outside of the circle, just watching. And the hardest thing is that sometimes you have to switch as a designer, as a teacher, as a community advocate, between these roles, and often as little as 15 minutes. But in doing so, in, again, being willing to be strong and wrong and look broadly at the world around us for needs and opportunities, and simply asking the question, how can we expect more out of this? How can we expect more out of the process of making a bike rack than just making a bike rack? It's not that hard. How can we expect more out of the process of fixing a school or improving a bus stop, as we've been working with Transit Authority to improve the bus stop and then get better data around bus usage in Flint, Michigan? It's not that hard. In fact, to make it really deeply personal, in each of our lives, we have things that annoy us, that we think could be better in our neighborhoods, in our homes, and even in our bedrooms. And the simple need, for example, in my case, of needing a lamp in my bedroom, needing light. That's actually a huge opportunity to do all of these things if we think about it the right way, and we think about growing what I call the cultures of greatness, of how these objects and these needs can be used to create new teams of people to solve these really tricky issues. And that's so, so important. It's not just about building. It's not just about empowering one person. Real change doesn't really happen unless you have small committed groups of people who are willing to support one another in wrestling with these difficult issues. And we have to take the time in design, in community, in cities, in education to do that if we really want to affect any sort of change. Even something as simple as a bench can be remarkably difficult. And that, at the core is what happened in Camden with Will, is that we were totally, through identifying these needs, identifying these opportunities in a neighborhood, and simply taking action, we were able to start to rewire actually the sort of social and community workings of that particular neighborhood through the incredible advocacy and action of Will and others. And that's what makes this so fun. Thank you.
We have a couple minutes for questions.
So how do you get these grants? Or how do you apply for this? I mean, this costs money. I know this is very inexpensively done, but still you need people to support you. So where do you get? Do they come?
So until about 2 months ago, we're for profit, and we function just like probably many of you in this gathering tonight, where we act as largely design consultants and community engagement consultants. And part of the reason for that is that the reason for being nonprofit is simply that no one, for the most part, is really doing this sort of work anywhere, and it had to be really lean, and it's taken a while to build up sort of the culture for paying for this type of work, and that this is valuable, not just paying for it, but that this is even possible, that you should be considering it. So it was the sort of slow lead time of developing a nonprofit. It just was not the option at the time. At the same time, though, almost aside from design firms, really, all of our clients are nonprofits. And so on the most basic level, if that client doesn't have the ability to set aside someone to work on a grant with us to support our work, or to have a grant writer to do that, then they're not really ready for the project. They're not really ready to support what's going to happen during and after it. And that is an ethical standpoint. I mean, again, it's really irresponsible to go in. Not all the communities that we work with are struggling, but in any case, it's really irresponsible to go into a place and go, rah, 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 you can do all this, see ya, and not make sure that the infrastructure is there to support people. So there's that, but then at the same time, we now have national visibility and with funders. And so the degree to which we can leverage that visibility and position to help our clients get grants that they may not otherwise be able to get, that improves their grant making record, we're able to, again, get another level of impact out of the project. So there's that. We did just get approval for our nonprofit arm of what we do. It was wonderful to go past Central High this afternoon and to see the WPA plaque on the outside of the wall. Our organization, the nonprofit, is called Tiny WPA. So that was kind of cool. But yeah, sometimes the money comes from grants, sometimes it comes from other sources altogether. A lot of times it's a mix. Yes?
I'm a real estate lawyer, and I did a lot of work in communities in Dallas, and I just have a quick question. Maybe just briefly tell me, for example, the skateboard part of the legalities, what you had to do with city permits and all that in terms of government structure, trying to get something done on the property, because been there, done that.
It's really tough.
Okay, good.
It's really tough.
I mean, I thought it was just me.
No, so that part, that last summer actually went surprisingly well and easy. It was easy peasy. I'm still kind of surprised at how easy it was. But the sad story is that this year, and it wasn't the city actually, it was their insurance company. For some reason, and it may have, I don't know all the intricacies. I have a feeling there was something they weren't telling me. Like they had new staffing who had a different idea. The organization had new staffing that had different ideas towards risk, but at a certain point, despite the fact that no one was injured, that we well documented all the positive aspects. I mean, we published it. The cops talked about it. The insurance company was demanding $8,000 to insure a pop-up for 3 months. And they wanted it behind a fence, locked. They wanted a safety inspector every day. And so the project didn't happen this summer. And it was one of the most frustrating things this year, because Will's sitting there left high and dry. So I actually very intentionally moved to Philadelphia because it's not Detroit where everything is broken and everyone knows it, right? There are actually city government. It has its issues, but it is still functioning, and it's functioning fairly well at points and really miserably at others. But at the same time, there are 40,000 vacant lots. And there's space for me to do things with a client or community partner where we're not going to get jumped on by L&I because that's the least of their worries. So where we can actually really model and show what's possible. And then there are other situations where it's really important, like the health department right now. I mean, I was having conversations about splinters 2 weeks ago, insane conversations, where they were the ones who got the grant and wanted to do the risky stuff. And then all of a sudden they're like, oh, no, no, no. But it's really in Philadelphia that having that mix between having some flexibility to test and try and not always ask for permission, but then other situations where you really do have to sit down and wrestle with the powers that be in the process to try to change policy is super important. But I think it is tactically going where the feedback is good and finding those partners who are going to be willing to take a risk on doing these projects to ultimately show that it is possible is super important. And so we're at a point now where, like most organizations, where some clients come to us and others we're still going and trying to find that partner to do that project where we think they get it and they're willing to step outside the box and let that happen. Yes?
I have so many things I want to share. I won't do it because I'd be here all night, but I'm struck by the audience tonight thinking really who you need to be talking to are teachers and educators. Mm-hmm. And with all due respect to this lovely crowd, we need folks who understand what you're saying. I have one slight critique that I'll share with you into what I'm going to say. But what you've described is, and you've done this so beautifully without critiquing the formal education system, I applaud you. I could not have done that. Because what you've identified are passions, which are completely ignored in the lives of children in schools these days because of the psychometric obsessions we have, which narrows the way of knowing so many ways. And I'm part of the blame for that. I've helped create that. Engagement, you missed, and there are a lot of people who've talked about engagement in thoughtful ways. John Goodlad's work back in the 70s. It's actually a very important concept, and we need to be quite serious about it. I agree with that. Frank Wilson, the great neuroscientist, talks about the hand ought to be part of the brain. Mm-hmm. We now have organized schools where we wouldn't even allow that. Perhaps that's part of the risk issue. You also invoke other ways of knowing and doing, service, really democracy, about ways to engage those of us who are different from one from the other, right? And so there's that beautiful thing. Most importantly, I think you talk about Paulo Freire's notion of constructing knowledge rather than just being banks for it to be dumped in top of our heads. Mm-hmm. I slightly disagree. There are a lot of people doing this work in important places. I think about Guy Vertali in the Bay Area. I think about Elliot Washer and Dennis Litke in the med schools, 128 schools across this country that really ground their work in learning by doing and handwork. And Mike Rose at UCLA, who understands the relationship between the kind of doing and intelligence. And so part of what we need to do is to really enrich the definitions of intelligence and success and passions. And so my critique of what it is that you said, this is what happens, we make judgments about kids A, B, C, or D, or E, right? Well, it might be that those kids are profoundly disengaged and misunderstood and not known well. And so I would just argue, don't call them the worst kids. Maybe they're simply not yet developed and nobody has reached them or touched them like perhaps your work has done. So thank you for being here.
Thanks. Yeah, I mean, just to make a point, I think, and I'm not a chest thumper at all, so I think just to be clear that Gever, Emily Polotin, the Workshop School in Philadelphia, Science Leadership Academy, there's some really great stuff going on out there. There are very few who are merging that into everyday sort of civic life. And I say that, again, not from a chest thumping standpoint, but more from, like, how do you describe the potential of this and recognize that this is a
the big picture schools do that,
yeah.
Actually.
And yeah, you're right. I mean, it is sort of a shorthand in terms of the worst kids. They're my favorite kids.
Thank you.
To work with.
Thank you.
And I think realizing, you know, it was funny, someone interviewed me for an article about a month ago, and they asked the sort of typical question, well, who is your inspiration? And I just sort of sat there stumbling for like a couple minutes, and there, you know, there are a whole list of like people and things that have inspired me, but the reason I stumbled was really because I gain most of my inspiration from the people that I encounter on the site, whatever site that is, every day. That's what, to me, that's what keeps me going. I was up till 2 last night at the mini park and playground with, you know, this retired Army guy, and he's an awful builder, but he he cares so deeply about his neighborhood and about doing this stuff for kids. I mean, that to me is my metric for like, that's why I'm doing it. That tells me that something's possible. If he's willing to stay there till 2 in the morning with me, you know, to help meet a deadline, shit. And so that, I realized I stumbled because that's where I get most of the inspiration and sense of possibilities. Like, people will show the way. And that to me is the more delicate thing in terms of talking about will and others, is not saying that, you know, wow, look what I cracked open in this kid. It's actually, no. This kid already had this real sort of latent desire, and maybe it was accelerated at this point because of that, but he was there. You know, it wasn't like in 4 weeks I sort of built this super citizen, so to speak. Thank you.
You have bracketed the intellectual end of this very well. My personal experience as a Philadelphian, I did my student teaching in Spring Garden Street School, which at that time, about 40 years ago, was pretty rough and tumble. And I think it's gotten worse than that. But my kids were considered not to be educable. So I had a broad range of ages in a given class. And I found that many of them would enter the classroom. I saw guns, I saw knives, and I never flinched, and I just said, put them away, we're not using them today, and we got on with business. And I sent no one to the principal's office. They were the best behaved, most cooperative children in a classroom. They helped one another because I got them empowered and engaged, and they began to help one another instead of fighting with one another. And I had pregnant girls, I had all kinds of ranges of children from different backgrounds and ethnicity. And empowerment back then worked just like it works today. And I taught art in that environment, and they were helping. When they get finished with the project, I said, okay, what is your class, next class? Well, it's on that. Okay, well, let's move on to that. And we started helping one another to prepare them for the next class if they had homework they had achieved. And it was a very, very positive experience to see those children grow and not be intimidated because they felt we were all going to be police in the classroom. And that's what their mindset was. But the same thing that worked then works today.
Yeah, well, it's congratulations on. What's that?
You get them engaged.
Well, it's clearly your level of care and understanding what is actually important in the situation is what mattered. And in this project that I was up till 2 a.m. last night working on, there's this kid, Kenny, and Kenny is 16 but looks about 12. And he actually got involved because a couple weeks ago, because he got kicked out of school on the pre-school day. And he got kicked out because he wasn't wearing a black belt. And so he came and started building with us. And, you know, we had this talk. It's like, you know, do you get in trouble much? He's like, yeah. But the rejoinder was like, well, I don't get in trouble. I only get in trouble when I'm not learning. And so when I enter school, it takes me 10 to 15 minutes to get through security to prove that I'm not going to hurt someone. and then I have to go sit in a room for a half an hour, and then I have to go, like, to wait for school to start. Then I have to go to mandatory assembly for another half an hour, and then finally I can start learning. He's like, I get in trouble in the first part of the day. And, you know, it's not that surprising to us, but sad, but not that surprising. But this kid has been so deeply involved in this project, and there was this one day where he was out prototyping. We're making this fort gym. It's supposed to be able to, like the bench, the switchback bench, be able to fit into, bring play and exercise to very small spaces. And he's sitting over there working on it, doing just a rad job, and this builder walks past, and he's clearly having a bad day, but he mumbles, well, that's just not serious. That's ridiculous. You're just messing around. Those ideas aren't worth something. He's like, and Kenny very calmly responded to the guy, but they're my ideas. And so I saw the whole interaction go down, and Kenny came over to me immediately afterwards, because I didn't hear all of it, and he told me exactly what had gone down. And we were in the midst of having the conversation, and the gentleman came back and said, young man, you're right. I'm wrong. They are your ideas. You're out here taking action, and that is something that both says something, but also is going to live with you for the rest of your life. Here's $20, lunch is on me. And whether it's rich or poor, or young or old, you know, that aspect of engagement and recognizing people and looking for, you know, where people have something really important to contribute is that starting point.
I'm sorry, we're gonna have to close comments. We can be out in the lobby, but we need to go ahead and start packing up.
Okay.